Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm very happy to be here with you today and to welcome Marcia Trajano, my co-host for the Seeds of Knowledge series. If this is the first time you're tuning into one of our discussions about Spiritism, the Solitude for Center for Spiritual Living provides these talks every first and third Sundays of the month. Today, Marcia Trajano is going to be discussing a very interesting topic. She's going to be talking about atavistic inheritance, unlocking the echoes of ourselves. Good morning, Marcia. Hope you're doing well.
I am. Thank you so very much, Yuri, for co-hosting this series of talks, and I'm so glad to be here today. Shall we go ahead and get started?
Absolutely. Take it
All
away. Thank
right.
you.
I'll see you later.
Yes.
Talk.
Bye bye.
Thanks. So, hi everyone. I am so happy to be here. And I have a few slides, and this is just to give us a sense of where we are. Not much, but just to, to kind of capture our imagination as we go through. And as you can see here, I see the image of Joanna de Angelis. And why? Because she inspired us on this topic on atavistic inheritance. But before I go into discussing this specific topic in Joanna de Angelis, right? I would like to say, first of all, Yuri, this is really a topic that interests me, the whole idea of atavistic inheritance. And if you don't know what that is, because you're kind of like, what? At a what? It is a term that refers to the notion, I'm talking about physically speaking, right? Genetically speaking, but it's the reappearance of a trait, something in the organism, and this can be in a plant, in an animal, and in human beings, right? And that whatever trait, it goes back, remotes to a distant past, a distant ancestor, and usually that trait is been not present in many generations. So if we, I don't know, I'm going to make this up right now, Yuri, in all those of you who are here with us today. But let's think, I don't know, a bird that initially had a very round beak, right? Maybe a parrot-like beak, and through evolution, yes, Darwin here with us today. Through the evolution, that beak becomes more pointed to the. Today, the bird is very different from an ancestor, I don't know, a million years ago. And for whatever reason, there is another bird that comes back with a very rounded beak. And that's where researchers are saying, hey, there's a connection. It's the same race, the same DNA. But look what happened. That uh, inheritance came even though it skipped many generations. And as I said, some other examples in nature and in us human beings is in some case human beings being born with a tail, right? And it's like, what is that tail for? And there are cases that have been recorded, or some animals with an extra toe. When I was a young woman, a teenager, my family had a dog that had an extra toe, and they say this is an example of atavistic inheritance. And well, if you think about it, again, genetically speaking, these are mutations, or better saying, dormant genes, or even a switch that can turn on and off over time, and it's linked to this species itself. So there is his evolutionary significance for studying atavisms, because those tails, extra toes, or whatever, they can provide certain insights into our evolutionary history and specific of a certain species. So those researchers and scientists, they start to study those genetic inherited atavism so they can understand the historical evolution. One application, because you may be thinking, Marcia, what are you talking about? Why is this even important? Well, one of the applications is how certain atavisms can be linked to certain rare but still present medical conditions. So it's all about this idea of re-emerging ancestral traits linked to certain syndromes. And, we can fast forward this type of research, and I can easily, my mind, my imagination easily can go to, yes, I can see as one day those researchers programming our genetics plan in the distant future. There are many, many science fiction that talk to that. But I have the photo of Joanna de Angelis in this slide for a reason, because we are not here to talk about our ancestral genes. Okay, we're here to understand the concept as it was explained by Joanna de Angelis in her work. From a context perspective, if you're not truly aware of who Joanna de Angelis is, and especially for those of us, and the work of Solitude Center for Spiritual Living, it centers a lot in the study of Joanna de Angelis, but Joanna specifically is known for her work in the integration or integrating psychological concepts with spiritual principles. So it is all about understanding our human psychology, our spiritual psychology within the context, the framework that Spiritism brings to us, this body of knowledge that Spiritism brings to us. So let's think about the spiritual author. She's an author. Joanna de Angelis is really truly recognized because she addresses that. She addresses how spiritual and say emotional, I'm going to say imbalance, right? But we can even talk of diseases or state in that you're not well, and how they are interconnected, right? And she links that the entire spiritist knowledge with healing those imbalances or those diseases. So, in a way, Joanna de Angel is here to provide that linkage, and I'm linking my hands here on the screen, right? So she's linking spiritist knowledge with psychological healing practices in a very holistic approach to mental health. That's why I like this to study Joanna de Angelis, right? And how does she do this? Well, she highlights these idea that our psychological suffering can be not necessarily 100%, but usually it is rooted not only in my past experience, right? So we're talking about as a child, I went through this trauma, and this is now expressed in how I go about my life today. But she also talks about the notion of a spiritual debt, right? In using a term that is more found in Eastern philosophies and religions, it's our say unresolved karmic issues from previous lives or previous existence. And it's super cool if you start to think about. I am not an entity that was born, created when my birthday, right? So many years ago, and I'm a product of those experience. I am also a product of what I have lived before I came to my present existence. And it's really leads to a different approach to therapy, right? Because in a therapeutical manner, we can start to look for spiritual reconciliation in addition to traditional psychological methods. And we could just stop here and say, this is it, folks. We're going to stop to talk about this notion. But let's go on for the next few minutes together because it's good to understand this work that Joanna de Angelis has brought to us through her collaborative and mediumship by Divaldo Pereira Franco, right? And many, many, many books have been authored by them in that collaboration. But specifically, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes looking at the work that are part of what we saw as the psychology collection or the psychological series of books, 16 books in total, where she brings that, I'm sorry, 17 books in total that she brings more in-depth analysis of how spiritism and psychology walk very close to each other, right? So I particularly love to read and study her work because Joanna de Angeli makes it quite easy to understand myself as an immortal soul, right? I am not just the product of several decades of living, but I also am a result of many other experiences, right? So we talk about that journey through different and I can call lifetimes, right? Through different existences and how they stay with us, those experiences. And some of the aspects of this understanding includes, for example, our emotional lives, right? When we look at this entire universe of emotions and feelings through the lenses of that spiritual life, that the spiritist lens. And we can do that when we examine how our emotions, for example, are tied to our psychological and spiritual aspects. So her work, in conclusion, provides those traditional psychological insights so that they can highlight how my emotions and my mental state, a state of balance and harmony or not, may have some physical and spiritual origins through this notion of atavistic inheritance. And it's good to note that through her work around emotions, we can really access the possibility, and it can be a solo journey or it can be the journey through therapy or psychotherapy or a journey that you have others accompanying you. And by others, we're talking about not only spiritually speaking with your guides, your mentors, but others that are aware of this journey, excuse me, that inner journey. So we talked about Joanna de Angelis. We talked about her work around emotions. Well, there's another aspect of her work that includes, interesting enough, in-depth analysis of human behavior through that same spiritist framework. Our behaviors, if you think about, right, and not only our behaviors, but our behavioral patterns, they are indeed influenced not only by context that we are inserted on. So I'm talking about our family traditions, our cultural aspects that I'm inserted on. So, for example, I was born in Brazil, and I was born. For those that do not know Brazil, but you can see my the palm of my hand, right? So if you think about this point here as the closest to Africa, for example, right? Then that's where I was born, where I live. But for a continental sized country, there are many different cultural contexts per each area of the country. So if you think about it, it's not only the subculture of our family, the education style, the presence or absence of conflicts, but what else around that place that I was born that made me, right? And what are the other environmental aspects of this lifetime that I'm living through, that I'm experiencing, that I'm reacting to? But in addition to all of this soup of things that influence my behavior, there are many, I'm talking about the exponentially larger number of spiritual factors that are rooted on aspects of our past lives, and specifically those, as I mentioned before, using that Eastern term, right? Eastern religious and philosophical term, our unresolved karmic conditions. What am I talking about? Pause to talk about what karma is. Karma, it's really in an easier aspect for us to understand. It is that law of cause and effect. You cause pain and you receive pain. But that is quite an outdated way to look at it, because when we talk about unresolved karmic conditions, we're talking about I caused something, right? And that the chain of reactions from whatever I have done, I become responsible for those results. Therefore, there are things that I bring within myself that I must address, right? And it's part of what I come back in a new existence with my responsibility. Let's pretend in a very silly way, but I am a teenager, and I don't know, I have a out of wedlock, too early pregnancy. That's the trigger, right? Something that I'm responsible for doing. How I go about changing my life to address that turn of events that were triggered by that pregnancy will have resolved or unresolved conditions from the trigger. Does this make sense? I hope it does. But one example, and if you're not a spiritist, I am, right? As a spiritist, for example, our Spiritist Center, before I moved to Nashville, we had various different types of activities, and one of them, that was the activity that had the largest audience. We called them our public meetings, or open to all. You don't need to be in doing a class or whatever. It's open to anyone at any time. It doesn't require repetitive attendance. Is our public meetings on Sundays in our center. And as it turns out, many different spiritual centers have the same type of activities on Sundays, right? And then we would, after the this presentation of material, a lecture of sorts where we start to learn, it is often that we see an activity called healing therapy, or laying of the hands, or in Portuguese, that some in English speaking countries like ourselves talk about, called as pass or passe, right? And those is really, it just feeds our soul, and we keep going that Sunday after Sunday after Sunday to learn and to have that ritualistic, if you will, often ritualistic view of the laying of the hand. One could argue, and I'm not blaming anything or anyone or even myself, but one could argue that these have a atavistic inheritance from our Catholic tradition and the need to go to Sunday Mass and receive in the Holy Host, right? One could argue that we are just replicating an earlier behavior due to our religious expression of our faith. So you see, Spiritism is not a type of philosophy, religion, and scientific body of thought, the body of knowledge that looks for rituals, and yet in a non-ritualistic type of expression of my religiosity, I do exactly that. And those are really an interesting way to see. "Oh, I didn't know that I was doing that." Yes, we were, but there are also other ancestral, let's say, traditions, behaviors, practices that are rooted in our ancient culture, or even based on, say, survival needs through time. Some examples are rites of passages found in indigenous people, right? Through founded, oh, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and they marked life transitions and connections with their sacred or even ancestral spirits. And if you think about it, do we need to have those rites of passage today in our postmodern society? One could argue that, or how obsolete are those practices? Yet we find them today, and they're central. They are the marks of, say, a successful life. What am I talking about? My wedding, or celebrating the life of a loved one by not only having a funeral but attending funeral, or in Judaic tradition, bar mitzvah, or Christian tradition, baptizing your child. All of those are meaningful rites of passage, right? But back to Joanna. That's why I have her here, so I can go back. Don't stray too far, Marcia, on the topic. Because when we read Joanna de Angelis and her work around the psychological aspects of our spirit, we start to understand that we are, and she really points to the question about where that we are, but she points to the point of where are you in this evolutionary condition, or of spiritual and psychological maturity, right? And whatever that point, and if I my gesture here is putting a line, an invisible line here on the screen, but from the beginning to this distant and when we become perfect and pure spirit, say. But if I am at the beginning, or moving along, where we are will actually play a very significant role in how we shape our psychological traits, or our expression of those, where we bring those, what we call our echoes, right, of ourselves, our behaviors, our emotional struggles. And this is really important to me, because her work here is really groundbreaking if you think about it, because she encourages this holistic understanding of the human psyche, and by doing that, she provides within the spiritual dimensions that also encompass traditional psychology, right? And if you think about it, if I am, let's say, struggling with something that is, it's not born of our current framework, genetic code, tradition, etc. But if I don't have that sense of continuity of my immortal soul journey, a psychotherapist, a doctor, psychiatrist may overlook the root causes of my pain. Shall we keep on going? I think so. Let's go to the next slide. I only have a few slides here, and I wrote down the definition. Right? What is spiritual atavistic inheritance? Well, Joanna de Angelis, I'm going to read here so we all can read together. Joanna de Angelis, she explores the idea that some of our behaviors, our tendencies, or traits are passed down through generations, but they're passed down not just through physical genetics, but through the that spiritual or moral aspects of ourselves. And you may still be thinking, why, Marcia? Why is this an interesting topic for you? Well, it is quite interesting to me because the topic keeps popping up in a number of her work, right? And we keep, we're talking about, I don't know, suffering, and there is this sense, this reference to atavistic inheritance. We're talking about something else, or existential conflicts, whatever they are, and it just she references this. So this is important to me, and it is interesting if we focus on some of her perspectives that she alludes in her teachings, in her books, right? Joanna de Angelis describes this concept of atavistic inheritance as truly the continuation of all of our unresolved patterns, our experiences, or even more traits in our previous lifetimes. And hint, hint, we're not going to talk about the shadow, but when we discuss shadow, those atavistic inheritance pop up. The concept pops up quite strongly, right? If you study Jung, for example, Carl Gustav Jung, and his reference to collective unconscious as well as Freudian personal unconscious, they all also reference this idea of my atavistic inheritance. Where is this coming from? I don't know. And that's where Joanna de Angelis now talks about this unresolved. It's a question mark in your behavior, in your traits. So if we think about it, these inherited traits are there. They're present, even though I may not quite connect the dots. And they may influence my actions, right? What I do, what I don't do, what I think or I don't think. So, yes, it permeates our thought processes. And most importantly, in my way of thinking, I believe that most importantly, it really colors my emotional response, my emotional landscape. How do I deal with my life day to day? Right? So it's interesting because if you think about it, we we do things and we feel things that we may not know quite why. Rationally, your rational logic points to A, but that irrational emotional logic may be pointing to something else. The image that comes to my mind is that the cartoon that came to us, right, by Pixar, where the emotional landscape of that preteen comes in, and it's like emotions like joy and sadness and anger, they all keep popping up as she is going through life. And it's a great little movie for all of us to start to understand that it's here, but it's really not a brain function necessarily. It is really part of our spiritual history, that baggage, that colors, that impacts how I live through things, emotionally speaking. So, some examples for us, because it's just cool to start think, oh yeah, you're right, right? It's not just the baptism and bar mitzvah or even weddings that have a significance that it may be completely obsolete. For example, going back to that example, early example, why do I wear white as a bride in a wedding? Have you thought about it? Well, if you look for the history of weddings or wedding ceremonies, and if you go back to the white, it has to be linked to the sense of it's not something that I dress when I work, because if I am working, I often will have splashes and things that will no longer have that purity of white. There are other symbolic reasons for the white. We're not going to get into this, but why do we still do it? Why, on a different note or a different question, why do we celebrate the things that we celebrate? What are the connection points of say Thanksgiving, right? I love, there's no other holiday today that I love more than Thanksgiving. So why do I love it so much? Have I actually, in a very rational mind, link the ancient agricultural practices that Thanksgiving is a reference? And yeah, I don't grow anything or a vegetable or anything. I buy my food in the supermarket. I don't need to have seasonal access to even certain fruits that I prefer. Nothing of this has a sense of my life. Yet, why is this so important to me? And how do I use that ritual, the celebration of we have a full plate, meaning a good harvest this year, to the sense of gratitude in our lives, right? So those are the types of things, just as an example, that you say, yeah, we do that, and those are meaningful practices that I have no linkage, e- historically speaking, anymore. But a different way to exemplify those echoes of our past, right? Why do we have a ring? Why do we wear jewelry? Yeah, I know. I'm taking demystifying all the things that are wonderful in life, but let's do it just for this exercise in our minds. But why do we buy things made of gold or silver as jewelry? Why do we tattoo ourselves? What about piercings? Those are all types of decorative ways for the body. And we can say, have we thought about how they really go back, and they have a very strong ritualistic and or symbolic purpose earlier thought in the Egyptians, right? Or behaviors that we found in Egypt, ancient Egypt, or back not so far away from Americas, but with the Mayans or indigenous tribes. And why do we continue to do that? Why do they have such an important social, cultural, and even spiritual significance to us? And we're talking about, even as I say this, the not just the emergence, but the widespread use of markings in your bodies through tattooing, right? I do this, and there's this hurt that is inflicted through the act of going through the process of getting a tattoo. But what do I choose? What are the significance to me? Why do I want to brand, quote unquote, brand myself to the world by doing that? Those are all very interesting. And why is this growing instead of being less prevalent? Because we are no longer living in ancient Egypt or in the Mayan or indigenous society. I have another one, another example for all of us to ponder when we think about atavistic inheritance, right? And this is, to me, is even more prevalent than celebrations or decoration of my body, right? But it's really the idea of storytelling and mythology. So, right? If you think about it, storytelling, it goes back, and I keep going back to Egypt. Forgive me, I recently have studied the book by Leon Denis, After Death, and he talks a lot about Egypt right at the beginning of the book, and I love it. I love anything Egypt. So it's my my examples all go back to Egypt, but storytelling in mythology you find there, but you also find, for example, with the Norse mythology. I can speak, right? Norse mythology in the Nordics, or Greek mythology, for example, and they really start to connect with ongoing, today, postmodern man, ongoing archetypal narratives, even when, yes, we no longer rely on the oral tradition of storytelling to pass on knowledge, right? We don't. And why, if we connect the dots, we, sorry, but it's awful. I love going to the movies, but movies, right? Movies is becoming, going to the theater, going to the movies, which populated my youth and my young adult life, right? I love it. I would go every week with my kids, and this is becoming a genre that is becoming obsolete, right? The medium of going to the large screen to see a movie. Yet, the superhero subgenre, and I'm talking about here Harry Potter, I'm talking about Star Wars, all the Marvel superheroes, they're not only still prevalent, but they amass this large group of people, young and no longer young individuals, going and enjoying those myths, those stories. Have we thought about why do those superhero narratives still speak to us, to our core? You know, we don't. And so it's interesting to see those practices, because they do influence many people, you and me, most likely. But if we keep on with the same thought processes, we can start to look at anything that influences our lives. And those influences are, I would say, through and through, right? Especially when we're now talking about this very individual, this solo journey of um, of going into our inner discovery, this journey of self discovery. And when we do this, if we do that intentionally or not, we will confront some aspects of who we are, and how our nature may betray our rational thought processes, for example. What are these, again, the echoes of who we are, who we were? How do they keep popping up? And so, just to be clear, all right, just to make sure that we understand, this atavistic inheritance that we're talking here today doesn't just include physical characteristic that may or may not jump a generation or two, but also our psychological and spiritual aspects that might be linked to our ancient past. And usually what surfaces today, the what, why am I doing this, that second look, that to take back, to say, why did I do this, why did I react this way? Because they are linked to not only past experience, past trauma, but most likely unresolved issues that, until they're resolved, they keep carrying over incarnation after incarnation. So, simply stating, let's think about the idea that beyond this physical nature, this bio, right? We human beings are biosocial individuals, right? This beyond this biological frame that we have today, and even our social aspect, right? What we inherit from our family, our spirits, each and every one of those 8 billion plus spirits that are currently incarnated on earth as we speak, they all carry over some attributes that could be or might need to be addressed. And most importantly, as they are now going from unresolved to solved mystery, right? They are able to help us transform ourselves through some growth, personal and spiritual growth, and this ability to better understand even how do I go about life in this current lifetime. So if we think specifically, as we keep going a little deeper into that solo journey, we can think about patterns of behavior. We can think about traumas, beliefs, right? I have this belief that it betrays everything that the context that I live on. What about my tendencies? And those could come from our ancestors or from our ancestral self, and they manifest in us often unconsciously, right? And it's important to think that those inheritance can be positive, but they can also carry very negative elements that may impact our attitudes, our choices. So, according to Joanna de Angelis, what we see on the screen, right? Those atavistic inheritances, she calls them, and I'm going to put air quotes here, residues of our past experiences, not only again from this life, but our past lives that will affect our psyche and also our relationships, and ultimately will influence, for example, our fears, our anxieties, and so many of those repetitive behaviors. So let's just keep going. And again, I have a slide here that is just a visual image for us to take a look. If you think about the impact of that atavistic inheritance, we can start to think about some examples and how they may impact us. So, shall we? First one that comes to my mind, and I'm going to be very transparent, I'm going to bring some of my own personal examples. Forgive me, everyone, but this is who I am. But when we talk about fears and phobias, um, we all may have some irrational fear of something. Some people have an irrational fear of water, right? Going swimming in a lake or murky waters, or even the violent waters of the sea, or it can come. Really in some cases where people will not cross a bridge, and without any clear explanation, like, see, it is safe, we have guardrails, you will not fall, and still there is that fear, that phobia. But we can see how it could have been an inheritance for a traumatic experience from a past life. In my case, I know I'm embarrassing, but I'm going to say it. I have a phobia of needles, of cuts, anything that oozes red, right? And I have to say, I can still remember in the middle of a conference. Yes, me and my best 4,000 people, my closest to 4,000 unknown people, right? We're all there in this conference, and in that, a lecturer, famous lecturer, starts to bring images. This is a healthcare conference, so many doctors in the audience and healthcare providers, but they start to show the impact of the theater war and what happens to those soldiers. And I can still remember how I am 1 minute looking at this slide, if you will, of a wounded soldier, in the next waking up with maybe 12, maybe 16 people around me in a circle. I interrupted the conference and they're all tending to me because I fainted, and I fainted large. I just fell and it was crazy embarrassing. Well, this was not the first. It may not be the last time, but in my 20s now, I am going to, I did my master's in art history. And part of the curriculum, we all had to study film, right? So the history of film. And I'm there watching this quite obscure but historically significant movie. It's called a surreal movie, The Andalusian Dog, and it's terrible because the professor starts the movie and says, "Please close your eyes if you cannot do this, but what you see actually happened." And what you see is this person cutting somebody's eyes, the eyeball. And I just, again, I fainted, and they had to stop the showing the movie. I had to be escorted out. Embarrassing, embarrassing. It is a phobic behavior in response to cuts and needles, etc. I often wonder, what do I need to do to overcome this phobia, right? And it's being aware, at least it helps me to better prepare in avoiding, if you will, some scenes or movies or etc. But on a different note now, we can also think about repetitive behaviors, right? What am I talking about? We're talking about habits, beliefs, or issues that are perpetuated. And we can talk about those that are from generation to generation, but it can be in ourselves. What am I talking about? Well, let's think about some difficulties that we face in relationships. Yes, those of us with multiple marriages, and we just don't know how to handle those relationships, or in some case, self-destructive patterns, right? So it can be, I don't know, gnawing at your biting your nails, or in some cases, which we're finding it's very hard for me to even say that, but some teenagers with self-cutting, self-harming. There's so many of those repetitive that it's really irrational if you think about, what am I doing here, right? And we can go on and on with those examples. But if you think about maybe not as gruesome as self-harm, but if you think about repetitive patterns that we find that makes no sense anymore, and we still do it. For example, why do families and father and mother have a different reaction with, say, the first child born, and if it's a boy versus being a girl? And we say this has really interesting impact in societies that are markedly, I could call chauvinistic or paternalistic, in the Middle East or even Asia. But today, we're here in the US, and we still have this, it's a boy, oh, it's a girl. Right? And I'm not calling you or me or anybody else, but this is something that we observe. And think about it. We no longer live in an agrarian society, or we're not part of aristocracy or even the monarchy. And as I say this, the first thing that pops into my mind is thinking about how all of the traumas that Prince Harry, right, from England, he wrote in his memoir Spare, and I read the book, and the impact it had on his mental health. So in that book, for example, he speaks about the fractured relationship between his father, his brother, and how that contributed to his alienation, right, with the royal institution in England. And in that book, he really starts to reveal, to open up of the idea of being overshadowed by his older brother, William, which is the link. This is a hint here of the book, the title Spare, because he refers with that as spare me, but also spare heir, right? He's the second son in case the oldest child, the oldest boy, it cannot be the new heir, the new king of England. And if we think about it, it's quite difficult because the sense of being sidelined, to being undervalued, and this need because of it to really desire to carve out his own identity outside of the institution, to leave England, to physically leave the country, not only his royal duties. And to me it's like, oh my goodness, is this not the tale of the prodigal son leaving home but longing to come back home to the welcoming embrace of his father, right? So, anyways, on a final note here, we can also think about our skills or talent, those I don't know, artistic or not talent in any particular area of interest. And I would like to just ask myself as well, what are your own pattern of behavior? What are your own, say, belief systems that you see recurring in your life or your family's life? Can you perhaps see how does this pattern have roots in some atavistic inheritance? How could it be changed, right? If you think about it, there are many examples out there how those things that we don't connect the dots are influencing our behaviors, are influencing our society, our culture, our country. And we can start to even see some of those collective attitudes, collective values that are passed down generation after generation, how they shape society, for example, how they shape our collective and individual behaviors, how they shape our interpersonal relationships. And I just wanted to conclude here. I think I have one more slide with, as I mentioned before, right, about Joanna de Angelis and some books that she wrote. She really focused on that the spiritual healing and how we can work on self discovery as a journey, right? How we can have the courage to embark and confront, and as a result, become aware of our own inner spiritual lives so that we can improve our emotional and psychological health and well being. So, really quickly here, because of our time is passing, if we think about it, she stresses that true healing comes from within, not from without. So, she encourages us in this psychological collection, the series of titles that I have here on the screen. They Right? They really ask you, they invite you to be brave. They invite you and me, right? All of us to reconcile with our past experiences. And I'm talking here, let's look the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that by looking and reconcile, most importantly, embracing that, if you will, inner child, the wounded child, right? And so when we do this, we can reach some spiritual growth. Healing beyond the benefits of therapy, medicine, really should involve that spiritual transformation that will affect all of us on a deeper level. So we can leave our discussion today with some questions for all of us to reflect, shall we? How, question number one, how can we become aware of our own atavistic inheritance so that we're better prepared to change our way of living? Okay. Another question may be, in what ways can that embracing in a journey to understand my own concept of spirituality, my own self-discovery, self-knowledge can help me in the process of my own spiritual growth, my own spiritual purification, and at the end of the day, overcoming some patterns of behaviors. How can those atavistic inheritance influence ethical and moral choices in our lives? So, with that, I just want to say, let us understand that our behaviors, which are deeply, deeply connected to, at first, our survival, right? They're connected to our spirituality. They're connected also as a biosocial being to how I relate to myself, to others, to my community, how they have indeed persisted in different forms for thousands of years, and how they pinpoint those atavistic inheritance. Because when you do this, it may lead us to understand what are the items that continue to influence us, and how do I choose to have them influence and shape me today? So I love that. It's about that idea that everything is available, right? Paul used to say that everything is licit, but not everything is convenient to me. So let's think about it. And let's also remember that as an immortal spirit, um, we have no breaks. For example, today I will pass away, and I die a physical corporeal death, and I go back to my spiritual dimension as an immortal spirit. I do not, let us never forget that, I do not become a saint, right? There are no magic switches that from one incarnation to the next allows our spirit to go through some quantum leaps of growth, right? The idea here is that the spiritual inheritance that we talk about here today, they offers us this notion of continuity between past, present, and the future, and the ways that we connect with ourselves, the ways we connect with one another. It also tells us how we can heal, how can we also better understand not only myself, my hurt, my emotional reaction, but also the world around us. By understanding ourselves and what we inherit from our previous experience can help us indeed consciously choose to change and even transform our reality. So let us allow ourselves to reflect on how we can use our knowledge of atavistic inheritance to promote self knowledge and spiritual growth, as Joanna suggests. I go now with leaving here. There are 17 titles on the screen. Those are the works that Joanna de Angelis brought to us. On the left hand are those titles, and when they were first published in English, right? And on the right side, unfortunately, we have not translated to English yet, but they are in their original publication in Portuguese. Each one is better than the other, I have to say. As we study, as we read, we become better at understanding this psychological lens of the spiritual and the human experience. And with that, I want to say I'm going to bring back, or Yuri, can you come back so that we can close our time here? Hi, Yuri. How you doing?
Hi, Marcia. Very well. Thank you so much for the very, very interesting topic. Very, very nice talk where we were able to understand a little bit of the cultural, psychological, spiritual inheritance and how that all sort of ties in together. So thank you so much for that. Would you be so kind as to do a prayer for us so we can close the work?
Absolutely. And thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, all of you who are here with us today. If we may just quickly and in a very simple way connect with all that is good, connect with the divine, the sacred nature of ourselves, that which is a long, continuous journey toward the light, toward the source, toward our Creator. And in this journey, may we all be open to look at ourselves lovingly as our Father loves us. And in this journey, may we be brave to look at ourselves, to see our blind responses to events, internal or external events, and how do we need to perhaps confront them so that we can indeed overcome. May we all embrace each other as children of God in humanity. So be it.
So
Thank you,
be it.
everyone. Yes.
Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you again next time during another episode of the Seeds of Knowledge.
Bye,
Have a
everyone.
great one. Bye bye.